To the aces of the Luftwaffe, the self-proclaimed masters of the European sky, it was a joke. A asterisk fliegende Milchflasche asterisk, a flying milk bottle. When the American P-47 Thunderbolt first lumbered into view over France, in the spring of 1943, German pilots couldn't help but laugh at its clumsy, bloated frame. This thing was enormous, weighing up to 8 tons fully loaded, nearly double their nimble Focke-Wulf 190s. They figured this airborne juggernaut would be a slow, easy kill, proof of what they saw as crude American engineering. As one German ace later admitted, "We laughed. We made a terrible mistake." That laughter would soon die in a storm of steel, as they discovered the milk bottle was filled with 8.50 caliber machine guns, a revolutionary engine that owned the high altitudes, and a toughness that was almost supernatural. They laughed at it, right up until it started systematically wiping them from the sky. In early 1943, the air war over Europe was a lethal chess match, and the German Luftwaffe were the grandmasters. Their fighters were finely honed blades, instruments of precision and speed that had dominated the skies for years. Into this arena of deadly artists came the American challenger, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. And on first glance, it looked like a total bust. It wasn't just the enemy who was skeptical. American pilots, many fresh out of flight school, took one look at the P-47 and were aghast. When the first planes were assigned to fighter groups in England, like the famed 4th and 78th, the reaction was disbelief. Many of these guys had been flying the nimble British Spitfire, a thoroughbred of a fighter. The P-47, by contrast, felt like a truck. Its cockpit was unusually spacious, which was a small comfort in a plane that felt sluggish and unresponsive. Pilots nicknamed it the Jug because its profile resembled a common milk jug. That name would stick, though it would later be recontextualized as short for Juggernaut. The plane's designer was a brilliant Georgian engineer named Alexander Kartveli. The U.S. Army Air Corps had tasked him with creating a new interceptor that could take on the Luftwaffe's best. Kartveli's solution was radical. Instead of a lightweight dogfighter, he designed his entire aircraft around the most powerful engine he could find, the massive 18-cylinder Pratt Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. To make it all work, he added a groundbreaking turbo-supercharger system that required a truly enormous airframe. When he presented the design, Kartveli himself reportedly said, "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." And a dinosaur it was. The P-47 weighed nearly 10,000 pounds empty. Fully loaded, it tipped the scales at over 17,000 pounds. For comparison, the FW-190, one of its main rivals, weighed less than 9,000 pounds fully armed. This immense weight had immediate and worrying consequences. The Thunderbolt's climb rate was poor. In a classic turning dogfight, it was hopelessly outclassed. It took forever to get off the ground, needing long runways that weren't always available at forward airfields in England. The Jug's combat debut on April 8, 1943, was a disaster. A fighter sweep over France had to be called off because the American radios didn't work, a humbling setback that forced the entire fleet to be refitted with British gear. When they finally did meet the enemy, the results were grim. In the first 2 months, P-47s flew over 2,000 missions, but only claimed 10 German planes, while losing 18 of their own. Luftwaffe pilots learned the playbook fast. Get the clumsy American giant into a low-altitude turning fight, and it was an easy kill. The flying milk bottle seemed to be just what they thought, an oversized, underperforming flop. Even the American pilots began to lose faith, especially the veterans of the 4th Fighter Group, who bitterly missed their Spitfires. The Germans watched the arrival of this behemoth not with fear, but with arrogance. They saw a plane built with brute force in mind, lacking the tactical finesse they prided themselves on. They saw it as proof that Americans just thought bigger was always better, a philosophy they were sure would fail. The laughter in Luftwaffe mess halls was genuine. They'd faced the best the Allies had, and this wasn't it. But what they failed to grasp was that the P-47 wasn't designed for their kind of fight. It was designed for a whole new kind of war, and the joke, they would soon discover, was on them. So why were the Germans so wrong? Because they were judging the Thunderbolt by their own standards, failing to look deeper and see the revolutionary heart of the beast. The P-47's secrets weren't in its agility, but in its engine and the incredible system that fed it, allowing it to dominate where it mattered most: the frigid, thin air above 25,000 feet. The first secret was the engine itself, the Pratt Whitney R-2800 Double Wasp. This wasn't just an engine. It was a 2,000-horsepower monument of engineering that would eventually be pushed to over 2,800 horsepower with water injection. For comparison, the superb engine in the Bf-109 produced around 1,400 to 1,800 horsepower. The R-2800 was, simply put, one of the most powerful piston engines of the war. Its radial design was also the key to the P-47's famous toughness. Unlike the liquid-cooled inline engines of the Spitfire or Bf-109, a radial engine's cylinders are arranged in a circle. This created more drag, hence the P-47's bulky shape. But it also meant there was no fragile cooling system with long, vulnerable tubes carrying vital fluid. German pilots were used to seeing their cannon shells rip through an engine, sever a coolant line, and watch the plane fall from the sky. The R-2800, however, was a different animal. It was air-cooled, and its sheer mass meant it could absorb an unbelievable amount of punishment. There are countless stories of P-47s returning to base with entire cylinders shot clean off, the engine still chugging along. But a powerful engine alone wasn't enough. At high altitudes, the air gets thin, starving an engine of oxygen. Most fighters used a gear-driven supercharger spun directly by the engine. This worked, but it was a parasite, robbing the engine of power, and its performance dropped off dramatically at high altitudes. Here's where the Thunderbolt's true secret weapon came in: its General Electric turbo-supercharger. Instead of being driven by the engine, the turbo was powered by the engine's own hot exhaust, waste energy. A mind-bogglingly complex network of ducts snaked from the engine down the belly of the plane to a turbine in the rear fuselage. This turbine used the exhaust to spin a compressor at over 20,000 RPM, scooping up thin, cold air, pressurizing it, and ramming it back into the engine. The result was nothing short of miraculous. While German fighters with their mechanical superchargers began to gasp for air above 25,000 feet, the P-47's R-2800 was just hitting its stride. The turbo allowed the Thunderbolt to maintain its immense power all the way up to 30,000 feet and beyond. Up there, in the realm of the high-altitude bombers it was built to protect, the clumsy jug became a thoroughbred. It was fast, responsive, and packed with energy its German adversaries just couldn't match. The Luftwaffe aces were being drawn into a new battlefield where all their advantages were stripped away. The flying milk bottle was revealing its first terrifying secret. It wasn't built to dance. It was built to hunt in an environment where nothing else could breathe. If the P-47's engine was its heart, its armament was its soul. German pilots, used to a balanced philosophy of firepower and ammunition, were about to meet an aircraft built on a uniquely American principle: overwhelming, unadulterated firepower. The Thunderbolt carried a staggering 8.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. This wasn't just a lot of guns, it was a flying artillery battery. With all 8 guns blazing, the P-47 could unleash over 100 rounds per second. Pilots didn't describe it as firing guns. They called it projecting a wall of lead. The ammunition load was just as massive, carrying up to 4,000 rounds. A Bf-109, by contrast, could exhaust its ammo in just a few short bursts. A Thunderbolt pilot could hold down the trigger for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. You didn't have to be a perfect shot. You just had to get the enemy somewhere in your sights and let the sheer volume of fire do the rest. The guns were angled to converge at a specific distance, often around 300 yards. Anything caught in that zone, a wing, a cockpit, an engine, would be utterly shredded. The heavy, high-velocity .50 caliber slugs could punch through armor and shatter engine blocks. Luftwaffe ace Günther Röhl described facing this as industrial execution. It changed air combat from a skilled duel into an act of industrial annihilation. This firepower was mounted on an airframe that could take a terrifying amount of punishment. The P-47 was, without exaggeration, one of the toughest planes ever built. The cockpit was a veritable bathtub of armor plating. The air-cooled radial engine, as mentioned, could absorb hits that would have vaporized a liquid-cooled engine, and its sheer size meant enemy rounds could often pass straight through without hitting anything vital. The stories of the P-47's durability are legendary. The most famous is that of Major Robert S. Johnson. On June 26, 1943, Johnson's P-47 was ambushed and shredded by at least 21 cannon shells and hundreds of machine gun rounds. His canopy was shattered, his plane was on fire, and he was wounded. He tried to bail out, but the damaged canopy was stuck, trapping him inside the burning wreck. In a desperate dive, the flames miraculously went out. As he limped towards the English Channel, a lone FW-190 moved in for the kill. Unable to fight back, Johnson braced for the end. The German pilot made several passes, pouring fire into the helpless Thunderbolt. Finally, out of ammunition, the German pilot pulled up alongside the mangled P-47. He looked across at Johnson, rocked his wings in a salute to a man he thought was already a ghost, and turned for home. Johnson somehow flew that wreck, which had over 200 bullet holes, back to base. This was the Thunderbolt's second revelation. It wasn't just an engine, it was a fortress. Luftwaffe pilots, used to seeing targets disintegrate, now faced an enemy that simply refused to die. They'd pour ammunition into the giant American fighter only to watch in disbelief as it stubbornly flew on. As Luftwaffe ace Heinz Baer famously said, the P-47 could absorb an astounding amount of lead. The laughter was gone. In its place was a growing sense of dread. They were fighting a monster. The P-47 was a weapon waiting for the right tactics. The early fumbles were the result of pilots trying to fight the Luftwaffe's game, a deadly mistake. But a new generation of shrewd commanders, like Hubert Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group, realized you don't send a heavyweight boxer to dance ballet. You teach him to use his power. The answer was a tactic as brutal as the plane itself: boom and zoom. The doctrine was simple: avoid turning dogfights at all costs. Instead, P-47 pilots used their engine's phenomenal high-altitude performance to climb above their opponents. From this perch at 30,000 feet or higher, they would scan the skies below for German fighters, and once a target was spotted, they would tip over and dive. And in a dive, the P-47 was untouchable. Its immense weight, a weakness in a climb, became its greatest asset. Gravity grabbed the 8-ton fighter and pulled it down with terrifying force. The Thunderbolt could reach speeds in a dive that would tear the wings off other aircraft, pushing well over 500 miles per hour. At these velocities, the P-47 became a guided missile. The attack was swift and devastating. A P-47 would plummet out of the sun, its target often completely unaware, until the sky erupted in tracers. The pilot had just a few seconds to line up a shot, squeeze the trigger, and unleash hell. Before the enemy could react, the Thunderbolt would be past him, using its incredible speed to climb back to altitude, ready for another pass. There was no duel, no graceful exchange. It was a high-speed execution. This tactical shift transformed the P-47's effectiveness, making it the premier escort for the B-17s and B-24s of the 8th Air Force. Now, German fighters had to fight their way through a ceiling of prowling Thunderbolts just to get near the bombers. By late 1943, German intelligence reports, which had initially dismissed the P-47, now identified it as a deadly threat. The aircraft itself was also evolving. One of the most significant upgrades was the bubble canopy. The original Razorback design had a huge blind spot to the rear, a fatal flaw. The new teardrop-shaped canopy gave the pilot an unobstructed 360-degree view. Another game-changer was a new paddle blade propeller. Its wider blades bit into the air more effectively, dramatically improving the P-47's takeoff, acceleration, and, most importantly, its rate of climb. The sluggish jug they had once mocked could now climb right along with them. With these improvements, the P-47 became a truly formidable fighter. It had the visibility and climb rate to complement its speed, firepower, and toughness. The days of laughing at the flying milk bottle were a distant, bitter memory. Now, when the Luftwaffe looked up and saw those bulky silhouettes circling high above, they felt a cold knot of fear. The sky was no longer theirs. As 1944 dawned, the new P-51 Mustang began to arrive in Europe. With its incredible range, the Mustang was perfect for escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. For a lesser aircraft, this might have meant obsolescence. But for the Thunderbolt, it was the beginning of a second life, a new calling where its talents for destruction would be unleashed with even greater ferocity. The role of the fighter bomber, or as the Germans came to call it in terror, the Jabo. The P-47's powerful engine meant it could carry a staggering payload, up to 2,500 pounds of bombs, a load that rivaled some light bombers, plus an array of up to 10 5-inch high-velocity rockets. This transformed the high-altitude hunter into a low-level angel of death. In the lead-up to D-Day, Allied air power was tasked with crippling the German war machine, and the P-47 was the perfect tool for the job. The effect was cataclysmic. Flying at treetop level, P-47s roamed across France, hunting anything that moved. Their targets were the arteries of the German army, railways, supply depots, and troop convoys. A flight of Thunderbolts could appear in seconds, their 8.50 cals ripping a column of trucks into a chain of burning wrecks. Their rockets could obliterate a tank. Their bombs could crater airfields. It was in this role that the P-47's legendary toughness became its most vital asset. Low-level attack is incredibly dangerous work, flying directly into a blizzard of ground fire. But the Thunderbolt's rugged airframe and air-cooled engine could soak it up and keep flying. P-47s would routinely return to base, riddled with holes, trailing smoke. Yet their pilots were alive. As one common saying went, "There isn't a P-47 pilot alive who wouldn't elect to belly one in rather than bail out." On D-Day, and in the brutal weeks that followed, the P-47 became the German soldiers' worst nightmare. German tank commanders, who once ruled the battlefield, were now paralyzed. Moving during daylight invited a swift and violent death from above. The distinctive roar of the R-2800 engine became a sound of impending doom, inducing a psychological condition among German troops known as Jabo fever. When the sound of a thunderbolt was heard, soldiers dived for cover, knowing a storm was only seconds away. The statistics are staggering. From D-Day to VE Day, P-47 pilots would go on to claim the destruction of 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. They systematically dismantled the German logistical network, starving the front lines. As the German commander-in-chief in the West, Gerd von Rundstedt, bitterly complained, Allied air power, led by the Jabos, had made it impossible to conduct any meaningful troop movements. The joke had become a juggernaut. The story of the P-47's victory isn't just about technology or tactics. It's the story of a clash between two totally different philosophies of war. The German approach relied on a core of highly skilled, irreplaceable aces. The American approach was one of industrial, overwhelming force. The P-47 was the perfect symbol of this doctrine. The sheer number of Thunderbolts produced is hard to even comprehend. Between 1941 and 1945, Republic Aviation churned out over 15,600 P-47s. At its peak, a new Thunderbolt was rolling off the assembly line every hour. This was an industrial tsunami the German war machine simply could not counter. While German factories struggled under constant bombing to produce a few hundred fighters a month, America was burying them under an avalanche of steel. This miracle extended to every part of the plane. Over 125,000 of the R-2800 engines were built, not just by Pratt and Whitney, but by car giants like Ford and Chevrolet. This ensured a limitless supply of planes and spare parts. When a P-47 was damaged, it was often repaired and flying in days. When a German fighter was lost, its replacement was uncertain, and the loss of its pilot was a catastrophic blow. And the pilots themselves were another product of this industrial-scale approach. While the Luftwaffe's training program withered from fuel shortages and constant combat, the U.S. Army Air Forces built a vast training pipeline. Before ever seeing combat, an American pilot received hundreds of hours of flight instruction. In stark contrast, by late in the war, a new Luftwaffe pilot was lucky to have 100 hours of total flight time before being thrown into battle. The Americans weren't just building more planes, they were building more pilots, nearly 200,000 of them. The loss of a pilot, while a tragedy, was a replaceable cog in a vast machine. The final piece was logistics. The P-47 was a thirsty machine, but America's industrial might ensured that the high-octane fuel, the ammunition, and everything else was available in seemingly infinite quantities. This was the war the Luftwaffe could never win. They weren't just fighting the P-47, they were fighting the entire industrial capacity of the United States. The P-47 was the steel-tipped spear of a juggernaut that ground the Luftwaffe into dust through sheer relentless attrition. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of World War II's most legendary aircraft, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We have plenty more stories of incredible machines and the brave people who flew them, and you won't want to miss out. By May 1945, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had carved its name into history. The plane, once mocked as a flying milk bottle, a clumsy joke, had become a legend. It ended the war with an official kill-to-loss ratio of over 4-to-1, having flown over 500,000 missions and destroying thousands of enemy aircraft and tens of thousands of vehicles. Its journey from underdog to dominator was a story of adaptation, of ruthlessly exploiting its strengths. It was a story of technological innovation, harnessing the power of a revolutionary engine to conquer the high-altitude frontier. And above all, it was a story of industrial philosophy, proving that wars are won not just by tactical brilliance, but by the relentless, overwhelming power of mass production. Perhaps the ultimate testament came from Germany's General of Fighters, Adolf Galland. When asked what truly defeated the Luftwaffe, he didn't point to a single battle. He pointed to the sky over Germany, darkened by swarms of American fighters that could hunt his own pilots to extinction. The P-47 was the brutal instrument of that dominance. Its legacy lives on. The P-47's design philosophy, a heavily armed, incredibly tough aircraft built to support ground troops, has a direct spiritual successor, the Fairchild Republic. A 10 Thunderbolt II, better known as the Warthog. The story of the P-47 is a perfect reversal of fortune. It begins with laughter and ends with fear. It starts as a joke and finishes as a juggernaut. It's a timeless reminder that in the deadly calculus of war, the most underestimated weapon can often become the most decisive one. It's 0530 hours, December 16th, 1944. The Ardennes forest, a sprawling, ancient woodland stretching across Belgium and Luxembourg, is cloaked in a deceptive peace. For months, this has been the Ghost Front, a quiet sector where battle-weary American divisions are sent to rest and green, untested units get their first taste of Europe. The men of the U.S. First Army shiver in their foxholes, dreaming of a hot meal and the end of the war, a victory that feels inevitable. They believe the German army is broken, a spent force capable only of retreating. In the darkness, on the other side of the line, another army waits. 200,000 German soldiers, veterans of the Eastern Front, hardened paratroopers, and dedicated soldiers of the SS, are coiled to strike. This is Hitler's last great gamble, an operation codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. It's a colossal bluff, designed to mask its true, audacious intent: to punch through the American lines, seize the vital port of Antwerp, and split the Allied armies in two. Their commanders have assured them that the soldiers they're about to face are soft. A mixed race, as German propaganda claimed, a nation of gangsters. They are, the Germans believe, poorly disciplined, too reliant on their material wealth, and lacking the warrior spirit of the German soldier. They are about to learn a terrible lesson. Within hours, their assumptions about American infantry will be shattered. Not by artillery, not by tanks, but by the terrifying, unrelenting firepower of a single rifle, a weapon that would fundamentally change the sound, the rhythm, and the brutal calculus of modern warfare. By the winter of 1944, the Third Reich was caught in the jaws of a closing vise. In the east, the Soviet juggernaut was grinding relentlessly towards the fatherland. In the west, the Allied armies, having stormed the beaches of Normandy and liberated France, were now pressing against the Siegfried Line. To any rational observer, the war was lost. But Adolf Hitler wasn't a rational observer. From his Wolf's Lair headquarters, he conceived of one final desperate masterstroke. He would hoard Germany's last strategic reserves, elite panzer divisions, newly raised Volksgrenadier units, and the best equipment he could find, and launch a surprise offensive on the Western Front. His logic was born of delusion, but it had a certain cunning. He believed the alliance between the democratic West and the communist Soviet Union was a fragile, unnatural thing. A devastating blow, a second Dunkirk, might just be enough to crack it. If he could encircle and destroy the British and American armies, he reasoned, they might be forced to negotiate a separate peace, allowing him to turn his full attention to the existential threat in the East. The chosen point of attack was the Ardennes. It was the same densely forested, hilly region his panzers had stormed in 1940 to outflank the Maginot Line and bring about the fall of France. Allied High Command considered it a difficult, almost impassable area for a large-scale armored offensive, especially during one of Europe's worst winters. Because of that, the 80-mile sector was the most thinly defended part of the entire Western Front. It was manned primarily by a mix of exhausted divisions and brand-new, inexperienced units like the 106th Infantry Division, who had only just arrived. Allied intelligence, overconfident and preoccupied with their own offensive plans, missed the signs. Terrible weather grounded the reconnaissance planes that might have spotted the massive buildup of German forces hiding in the forests. The plan, now retitled Herbstnebel or Autumn Mist, called for Sepp Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army to strike north towards Antwerp, while General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army would protect its flank and drive towards Brussels. The attack was set for the pre-dawn hours of December 16th. As thousands of German soldiers moved silently into position, a quiet confidence settled over them. They were veterans. They were warriors. They understood the art of the attack, the swift violence of fire and maneuver. And they were about to face an enemy they had been taught to despise. The German perception of the American soldier in 1944 was a dangerous cocktail of arrogance and propaganda. German ideology had long portrayed Americans as a decadent, racially mixed people, more interested in jazz and Hollywood than in the martial virtues of sacrifice and discipline. Early encounters in the war seemed to confirm this. At the Battle of Kasserine Pass in 1943, inexperienced American troops had been badly mauled by Rommel's veterans, reinforcing the German belief that the Amis, as they called them, were amateur soldiers. German officers noted that American troops seemed to lack camouflage discipline, often bunching up and making themselves easy targets. They were seen as overly reliant on their immense material advantage, preferring to let artillery and air power do the fighting. Post-war interviews with German veterans reveal a common theme. They felt that, man for man, they were superior soldiers, and that the Americans only won because they overwhelmed them with an endless supply of tanks, shells, and bombs. This mindset was deeply tied to the weapon carried by the average German infantryman, the Karabiner 98 Kurz, or Kar 98K. This was more than just a rifle. It was a symbol of a proud Prussian military tradition. Adopted in 1935, the Kar 98K was the culmination of the Mauser bolt-action design, a system famous for its strength, reliability, and accuracy. In the hands of a trained marksman, it was a deadly instrument. A German soldier was drilled relentlessly with his Kar 98K. Firing it was a practiced, deliberate rhythm. Fire, work the bolt up and back, push forward and down, reacquire the target, fire again. A skilled rifleman could manage about 15 aimed shots in a minute, feeding the 5-round internal magazine with stripper clips. But this very proficiency also bred a specific tactical doctrine. The core of a German squad's firepower wasn't its riflemen, but its machine gun, the terrifying MG-42, nicknamed Hitler's buzzsaw for its blistering 1,200 round-per-minute rate of fire. The rifleman's primary job was to support the machine gun, protect its flanks, and carry ammunition for it. Their Kar 98s were for picking off targets, while the MG-42 did the real work. This was the established order of infantry combat as they understood it. An attack would be met by the staccato bursts of a machine gun, with the slower, sporadic crack of bolt-action rifles filling the gaps. It was a rhythm they knew, a tempo they could read. They believed the American squads they would face were organized in a similar fashion. They were fatally wrong. While Germany was perfecting a weapon system born in the 19th century, America was making a revolutionary leap into the 20th. The decision to equip its entire army with a semi-automatic rifle as standard issue was one of the most audacious and consequential military gambles in modern history. The weapon that made this possible was the U.S. rifle, caliber .30 M1, known simply by the name of its creator, Garand. John C. Garand was a quiet, methodical genius, a civilian engineer working at the U.S. government's Springfield Armory. He spent 2 decades perfecting his design, trying to solve a fundamental problem. The bolt-action rifle, for all its accuracy, was slow. It forced a soldier to break his aim with every single shot. A semi-automatic action, which used the gun's own energy to eject the spent casing and load the next round, would dramatically increase a soldier's rate of fire. After years of painstaking refinement, Garand's gas-operated design was formally adopted as the M1 rifle on January 9, 1936. The United States became the first and only nation in the world to adopt a semi-automatic rifle as its standard infantry arm. It was a decision many in Europe's more traditional militaries saw as reckless. A semi-auto was more complex, more expensive, and would surely encourage soldiers to waste ammunition. They believed America's industrial base could never produce such a weapon in the quantities needed for a major war. They underestimated the arsenal of democracy. The production of the M1 Garand was a story of industrial might. As the nation mobilized for war, Springfield Armory and the Winchester Repeating Arms Company transformed into manufacturing powerhouses. Methods were streamlined, and specialized machines performed hundreds of precise cuts and drills. The workforce itself was revolutionized. By 1943, an incredible 43% of the workers building this quintessential American battle rifle at Springfield Armory were women. At its peak, the armory was churning out nearly 4,000 rifles a day. In contrast, Germany's own attempt at a mass-produced semi-automatic, the Gewehr 43, was plagued with issues and saw a total production run of only around 400,000 for the entire war. Total wartime production of the M1 Garand would reach about 5.4 million, and by the time of the German offensive in December 1944, roughly 4 million had already been fielded. This mass production had another benefit: simplified training. A recruit could be taught to effectively operate and maintain the M1 in a matter of weeks. The M1 was a weapon for a citizen army, designed to make ordinary men extraordinarily effective, extraordinarily quickly. In the hands of a GI, the M1 Garand weighed a hefty 9.5 pounds and fired the powerful .30-06 Springfield cartridge. But its most distinctive feature was its feeding system. The M1 was fed by an 8-round en-bloc clip, which was inserted as a single unit into the magazine. This allowed for remarkably fast reloading. When the last round was fired, the empty steel clip was automatically ejected with a distinctive high-pitched ping, a sound that would become legendary. This system gave the American rifleman a staggering advantage. While his German counterpart was methodically working his bolt for maybe 15 aimed shots a minute, a GI with his Garand could deliver a practical, aimed rate of 30 shots per minute, or even more in a close-quarters firefight. The semi-automatic action meant the soldier could fire, assess the shot's impact, and fire again almost instantly. without ever taking his eyes off the target. Now, consider this at the squad level. A German squad had one MG-42 machine gun and 9 riflemen with bolt-action Kar 98KS. An American rifle squad, however, was a symphony of semi-automatic fire. It typically had one Browning automatic rifle, BAR, and a full 11 riflemen, each armed with a semi-automatic M1 Garand. This wasn't a marginal difference. It was a complete redefinition of infantry firepower. The German doctrine was built around a single point of heavy fire. The American doctrine distributed a high volume of accurate, sustained fire across every single man in the squad. It allowed for tactics the Germans could barely comprehend, like marching fire, where an entire squad could advance while laying down a continuous sheet of suppressive fire. When the veterans of the Wehrmacht and SS stepped off into the snowy darkness on December 16th, this is the wall of steel they were about to walk into. The German assault at 0530 hours was a cacophony of thunder. Thousands of artillery pieces and rockets opened up on the American lines, a terrifying barrage designed to sow panic. And in the first hours, it worked perfectly. Surprise was total. Panzer divisions and Volksgrenadiers smashed through the thin American defenses, overrunning forward positions and sending confused GIs reeling. The sheer shock of the attack created the bulge in the Allied line that gave the battle its name. Inexperienced units like the 106th Infantry Division were quickly surrounded, and 2 of its regiments were forced to surrender, one of the worst U.S. Army defeats of the war. German spearheads raced forward, their confidence soaring. The Americans were breaking, just as predicted. But then, in small pockets of resistance, along crucial crossroads and ridgelines, the Germans began to encounter something they did not expect. It was a sound of continuous, overwhelming rifle fire, unlike anything they had ever faced. Imagine a German squad of Panzer Grenadiers advancing through the snow. They move with practiced skill, expecting to draw fire from an American machine gun. Their own MG-42 opens up, and in the lull as the gunner changes belts, they prepare to rush forward. But the lull never comes. Instead of the isolated cracks of bolt-action rifles, they're met with a sustained, roaring volley. It's not the cyclic rate of a machine gun, but a furious, unbroken fusillade of individual shots coming from everywhere. To the Germans, it was bewildering. It sounded as if every single American soldier had a machine gun. A German report from the battle noted with astonishment that American rifle fire was continuous and as effective as machine guns, causing casualties at an unanticipated rate. One veteran of the brutal Eastern Front swore he had never experienced anything like the sheer volume of fire the Americans could produce. The psychological impact was devastating. German tactics depended on finding lulls in enemy fire. Against the M1 Garand, there were no lulls. As soon as one GI fired his 8th round and his clip pinged out, the man next to him was still firing. A squad of 12 men could maintain a nearly continuous stream of accurate .30-06 rounds, creating an almost impenetrable wall of lead. Pinned down, German soldiers could only hug the frozen earth as this storm of fire ripped through the trees, chewing up their cover. Their entire doctrine was being dismantled by the democratic firepower of a dozen semi-automatic rifles. A perfect example of the M1's impact came in the northern sector of the Bulge, along a bleak, wind-swept piece of high ground known as Elsenborn Ridge. This ridge was the critical northern shoulder of the German attack. If Sepp Dietrich's 6th SS Panzer Army was to get to Antwerp, it had to break through here. Standing in their way, were veterans of the U.S. 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions. For 10 days, Germany's most elite units, including the 1st SS Panzer Division, threw themselves against the American defenders. They were met with a defense of almost unbelievable ferocity. Outnumbered and pounded by artillery, the American GIs refused to break. The key to their defense was firepower. Artillery, interlocking fields of machine gun fire, and resolute tactics were all critical. But what gave the individual riflemen the ability to hold their ground was the M1 Garand. They dug in and used their rifles to slaughter the attacking German infantry. The Germans would attack, often at night, expecting to overwhelm the defenders in close combat. But they could rarely get close. The GIs would hold their fire until the attackers were within a few hundred yards, then unleash a storm of semi-automatic fire. The volume was so immense that entire German attacks would wither and break. The elite of the SS, men who had conquered France and fought across Russia, were cut down in droves by what they later described as fire magic. The M1 Garand allowed outnumbered American units to generate a volume of fire disproportionate to their size, effectively multiplying their strength and helping to derail the entire northern axis of Hitler's offensive. The Battle of the Bulge officially ended on January 25, 1945. Hitler's last gamble had failed, at a catastrophic cost of over 100,000 of his best remaining soldiers and 800 tanks. While many factors led to the Allied victory, the heroic defense of Bastogne, the eventual clearing of the weather allowing air power to dominate, and sheer logistical might, the role of the infantry rifle was undeniable. The M1 Garand had passed its most severe test. In the aftermath, German commanders revealed a grudging but universal respect for American firepower. They finally understood that the American way of war wasn't one of cowardice, but of brutal, overwhelming efficiency. They hadn't avoided close combat because they were afraid. They avoided it because it was unnecessary. Why charge with a bayonet when you can annihilate your enemy from 200 yards? This sentiment was perfectly encapsulated by one of America's most famously aggressive commanders, General George S. Patton, who, after seeing the rifle in action, famously called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. The Garand gave the individual rifleman a level of power and tactical flexibility that was previously unimaginable. It empowered small units to take the initiative, to pin down, flank, and destroy the enemy with their own organic firepower. But the legacy of the M1 Garand is more than just tactical. It was a symbol of the very system that created it. While the German Kar 98K was a product of a traditional craft-based military system, the M1 was a product of a democratic, industrial society. It was designed for mass production by a mobilized civilian workforce and built to give the average citizen soldier an edge. It was a triumph of innovation, logistics, and a philosophy that believed in empowering the individual. If you found this look into battlefield technology fascinating, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into military history. And let us know in the comments, what other weapon do you think had a decisive impact on World War II? The story of the M1 Garand at the Battle of the Bulge is a powerful reminder that wars are won not just by grand strategies, but by the tools placed in the hands of ordinary soldiers. The German High Command was right about one thing. The American military did rely on its material wealth, but they failed to understand what that truly meant. It wasn't just about having more tanks and planes. It was about a philosophy of innovation that could conceive of, build, and field a revolutionary weapon like the M1 Garand by the millions. On that cold December morning, two armies and two philosophies collided. One was rooted in tradition and a belief in the innate superiority of its warriors. The other was built on industrial power, pragmatism, and the belief that technology could make any soldier superior. That sound that echoed through the Ardennes, that steady, unrelenting rhythm of semi-automatic fire, was the sound of the future arriving, and the sound of the Third Reich's final doom.